right, hello everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Emotional Embuffination podcast. I am your host, David Enebolton, and here on Emotional Embuffination, we are training to become emotionally buff enough to overcome any conflict in life. And at the same time, we are trying to maximize and optimize positive feelings. In other words, we're trying to get through the bad times as effectively as possible, while at the same time trying to maintain a really happy attitude, joyful, just get through life as best as we possibly can. This podcast is just one of a number of different resources I have available. If you want to learn more about any of those, check out the website, which is embuff.com. That's embuff.com. When you're there, make sure that you sign up for the newsletter. Check out all the other stuff that's there. I've got a book. There's an audio book, several books actually. Also, please do me a favor, and wherever it is that you're hearing or seeing this video, or this podcast rather, please make sure, and it would help me out a ton if you leave reviews, subscribe, do all the usual stuff that you do with social media and podcasts and all that. So with that, today's show, we are going to be talking about how to hire employees and avoid drama. Now, this is going to be most relevant, of course, to employers, but if you are an employee, this is also going to have some relevance, because this is going to tell you what an employer should or could be looking at, with respect to hiring and maintaining employees in the workplace. And quite frankly, this is also going to give you, even if you're not an employer, it's going to give you insight into the drama dynamics at a workplace. So if you are at work and you're experiencing a lot of drama, a lot of high conflict with other people, or you're just seeing constant nonsense going on around you, I'm hoping that this will offer some insight there. So there should be relevance to a number of different people here. But the focus of this is going to be on how to hire for someone that is not drama. Now, this comes from some experiences I've had as an attorney working. I've been a partner in a law firm for a while, and I have a business partner. We've hired a number of different people. We've had to fire people at different times. And one of the biggest problems that I early on learned was that some people would just be tons of drama. And it was really hard for me at first to figure out how to filter that out. And I had to go through some very negative experiences for a while. Had to go through some employees that just frankly were drama before I recognized essentially a system by which to extract that and prevent that and make sure that I wasn't hiring these high drama people. It's super important just for your own sanity, for your law firm's productivity, to make sure that you're not getting people that are high drama, that are in your workforce. There was once I hired somebody who just was crazy. This person was there for a while. At the time, the last couple days that we worked with this person, it completely shut down the entire firm. Just everyone stopped functioning for about 3 days. And it was just drama that did not need to happen. And so that was actually my turning point, or our turning point, where we said we can't have this happen anymore. And so we started to really focus a lot on filtering for drama on the front end. Looking back at what I realized afterwards and some of the filtering systems I developed later, it became painfully obvious. The red flags were all there, and I just didn't know that they were there. I didn't know what to look for at that point. So I'm hoping that this is all going to offer some insight there. Keep in mind also that when I'm talking about hiring here, this is not the only thing they're going to be looking at. Obviously, you want to be thinking about things like making sure that people are matching up their skill sets to the job that's needed. If you don't have, for example, if I'm hiring a lawyer, I want to make sure that they have the basic skills to be a lawyer that's going to fill in the job that I'm looking for. I'm not going to focus on that at all in this particular podcast. So I just want to make sure you don't forget those things. This is not the only thing you're going to be looking at when you're doing an interview for somebody, or when you're looking at hiring a person. But this is a major one for me, at least. A lot of this, I think, starts from understanding the drama triangle. And I don't want to go too deep into this, but I'm going to explain it briefly just to make sure that you understand it. If you've heard any of my stuff in the past, you know that I'm huge on the drama triangle. And I think it's understanding the drama triangle does a lot to getting the dynamics of drama. And if you start to understand what's going on in the drama triangle, you can start to avoid drama and not play the drama game. So let me just briefly explain what that is. If you want more detail on this, please check out, I've done some previous podcasts where I've explained it in a way more detail and more fully. But the basic idea of the drama triangle is it's a description of human interactions, particularly when people are dealing with things they don't like. When they're frustrated by whatever, they have a tendency to slip into this thing we call the drama triangle. Now, it was developed by Dr. Stephen Cartman a long time ago, and it's sort of, parts of it have become almost vernacular in our speech now, and people don't even realize where it comes from. But essentially the idea is you have 3 points. So you have a triangle. Everything's on these 3 points, the 3 points of a triangle. On the bottom of the triangle, you have a victim. And in the upper left, you have a persecutor. In the upper right, you have a rescuer. Now, each of these 3 points are representative of a mindset, an orientation that we take when we're approaching problems. And you can move back and forth between these. You very often will have a proclivity for one over the other. But essentially, the idea is you start to approach a problem that you don't like, so you get sucked into this situation, you're not happy with how things are going, you're going to drop into one of these 3 roles. You're going to be a victim. When you're a victim, or you might be a victim, if you are going into victim orientation, that means that you feel disempowered, you feel like this thing or person or whatever situation is oppressing you, and you are powerless to do anything about it, and you have a tendency to just kind of wallow in self-pity, and you become upset, and most importantly, you don't take any action. You just kind of freeze up and sit there. Another way of dealing with problems is to go into persecutor mode. And persecutor mode has a tendency to lash out. There's a lot of anger that comes out of that. It's a lot of need for control, a lot of, I can't let this person get away with this thing. I need to make sure that they're following the social rules. I need to make sure that they're following the employer rules, whatever it is. But usually it's characterized by anger, lashing out, wanting to control things, or just make sure that everybody's doing what they're supposed to be doing, that kind of thing. And then lastly, we have the rescuer. The rescuer position is very focused on jumping in and saving the day. So a lot of times they're looking at somebody that seems to be coming out of a victim orientation, and the rescuer wants to jump in and protect that victim. So they see somebody that they feel is being oppressed, and this is an interesting element of it, this is whether or not the victim actually wants help or is asking for help. They want to jump in there and be the white knight. They want to save the day. They want to be the hero. They want to fight for the oppressed, that kind of thing. Now, when you're in that rescuer orientation, the problem is that you effectively fight on behalf of the victim, thereby disempowering the victim. So the victim becomes entirely dependent on you in order to solve this problem. Whereas if you had somebody that was figuring out how to solve things on their own, at least partially, then they're in a much better position to be able to deal with problems in the future. But if you're the one solving the problem for them, they don't really learn anything other than that they're dependent on you. So the problem with the drama triangle is that, number one, it causes drama. But, when you're in any of these roles, the orientations tend to inflame the situation or perpetuate the situation. So, for example, if I'm a victim, I'm not taking action to solve my problem. I'm not doing anything that's going to get me out of the situation that I'm in. I'm not doing anything that's going to solve the problem. I'm just sitting there and essentially crying. I'm saying, I can't do this, I can't do this, I can't do this, and nothing's going to happen, right? The persecutor, when you're in persecutor mode, you have a tendency to inflame and make people defensive. So when I come in and I just start yelling at someone, think about what happens when somebody starts yelling at you that you're doing something wrong. Most people don't immediately go, oh, you're right. Okay, let me do that differently. If you're getting screamed at by someone, most people get defensive and say, nuh-uh, I'm not doing this wrong, you're doing this wrong, and they start to fight you. So if they're fighting you, or if they start resenting you silently without fighting you, then you're not actually making progress. You're kind of just fireballing the situation out of control. Now, there are times when you can kind of bulldoze over people and kind of force them to acquiesce to what you're asking for, but it can cause all sorts of problems, and a lot of times you inflame the rescuers. And we've already talked about the problem with the rescuer insofar as they want to come in and save the day and disempower the victim. A lot of times they're creating resentment with the persecutor because if the rescuer comes in. One of my favorite examples of this is in a domestic violence situation. If you think of say the very prototypical abused housewife, husband is physically abusive and he's coming around beating his wife, and then somebody finds out about it and says, oh, if I just had 5 minutes alone with that guy, they come up and say this guy beats up the husband. Great, we all feel better about that, but the husband doesn't necessarily learn a lesson. I've worked in family law for over a decade, and in that time I never saw somebody that I thought was physically abusive get beat up and go, I've been wrong this whole time. I shouldn't beat my wife. I've learned my lesson. I'm going to change now. That doesn't happen. That's not how it works. Usually if you beat up an abuser in whatever manner, even if it's not physically beating them, even if you're beating them up in a courtroom, they don't stop and get retrospective and start to change their behavior. What they do is either they get more surreptitious about their behavior and sneakier and figure out how to do the same things but more covertly without leaving a trail. For example, think of the guys who say, well, it's not physical abuse if I don't leave a bruise. I've heard that kind of comment before. That's one way of resolving that issue. Another thing is they'll start to get resentful and say, well, that person that beat me up was in the wrong. I'm the victim now. And what did you tell that guy? Now he might turn around and start beating a housewife even more. Are you having an affair with that guy? What's going on? So even in that rescuer role, you can inflame the situation by prompting the persecutor to unload even more on the victim or to lash back at the rescuer. So all of these roles create problems. They all have a tendency to not solve the problem. There's lots of remedies to dealing with the drama triangle. I'm not going to go into that today. I just want to make sure you have a basic understanding of what drama is, so that we can look at it in the workplace. And specifically, how do we filter it out before it gets there in the first place? So with that understanding in place, we want to avoid this in the workplace. You do not want your life to be miserable. I would also be remiss in not mentioning that I think it's very important to work on yourself in this situation. I've seen a number of different business coaching models that will revolve around the idea that you are an integral part of your business. Even if this is like a large corporate setting, you are an important element of your business. And even if it's just like your team, you impact, and your mindset and the attitude that you're bringing to the workplace, to your job, to your business, whatever, that's going to ripple out into everybody that you're working with. So if you don't have your own head on straight, if you are not doing things to make yourself more emotionally embuffed, that's going to create problems down the road. So you want to make sure that you are doing all that. You want to make sure that you have your head on straight, that you are actively working on stuff. That's what emotional embuffination is all about. So if you're not already watching stuff, reading stuff, on this topic, please do that. I don't want to go too far into that, but I just think it's very important to understand that you need to have your own head on straight, because you are an integral part of what's going on in the drama universe. And we have a tendency to attract and be attracted to people of comparable emotional developmental levels. So if you are high drama yourself, you are going to have an inherent draw to those people that are also high drama. So I know this is maybe simple and it's hard for a lot of people to digest, but if you're constantly interfacing with people in your life that are drama, start working on yourself. And I've seen some really fascinating people just 180 this. I have a good friend who was perpetually in romantic relationships with guys that were just crazy drama. And it was like just one after another. And it was like everything was over the top insane. And she just kind of took a pause for a while and said, I'm going to fix myself. So she broke up with the last guy, spent, I think it was like a year, just diving into self-help materials, doing all sorts of stuff. And then she kind of went back into the scene after she'd done a lot of self-work, and then found the first person that she married. And to this day, she's still married to that person. And it's been stable. It's been low drama. It's been nice. So this applies to the workplace as well. Make sure that you have your own head straight on before you start looking at everybody else. But with that said, I'm going to assume for the moment that you are indeed working on that. You are making sure that you are not bringing drama into your workplace. You've got this prospective employee that walks in through the door. What do? How do you make sure that you are filtering for the drama? How do we flush this out in the interview? It ironically doesn't have to take that much time. You do want to be on the watch for anything that sounds off. If if something doesn't sound right, probe into it. You don't have to follow a specific script if you are controlling the interview. Generally speaking, you can ask whatever questions you want to ask, as long as they're legal, of course. And that's another thing. I'm not going to touch the legal stuff in this. Make sure that you're complying with whatever the legal requirements in your jurisdiction are. Obviously, there's certain things you can't ask in different places. But if you hear something that sounds off, probe into it a little bit, as much as you legally can do so. I had an example of this that I found very interesting. I had a prospective employee that came in for an interview with myself and my partner, and this employee came in and was trying to take a paralegal position. And this person said that she had just finished up her paralegal certificate. She was in a totally different city, was determined to move it to the Phoenix, Arizona area where we were. And because she just finished up her paralegal certificate, she wanted to come out and be a paralegal. And she'd been working like in server jobs before that. She didn't want to do that anymore. So she quit the previous job, was just moving down to Phoenix, and she was just hunting for jobs now. And I thought, okay, that didn't quite sit right with me. And so there was that red flag went off in my head, as that story didn't quite make sense. So I parked that in the back of my mind. Later on, circled back to it, and I flushed it out with more questions later. And when I flushed it out, it turned into this very dramatic story that it turned out she'd actually been fired. And it was like based on this high drama stuff that she had done. So if you feel those red flags, like, probe more deeply into it. Those red flags are not meaningless unless you are just super high neurotic and high strung all the time. Heed those red flags, like, probe into it. I mean, you're not going to lose anything by asking a couple basic questions just to find some more deeply. Okay, specific questions that you can ask. Things that I am big on is asking about current and prior bosses or managers, and ask about the relationships between those people. So as an example, you can say, can you tell me a little bit about your last boss, and what was he like? How was your relationship with your last boss? How do you think your boss would characterize you? And I like to go through this cycle through several. Usually you'll get their resume and they've got several different jobs listed on there. I like to repeat this for several different bosses. So, if they've got, say, 3 jobs on there, I can go through and say, okay, when you were here, who were you working for? Tell me about that person. How was your relationship with them? Go through that list of questions there and say, get a feel for how they're interacting with their bosses. Now, when they give you these responses, I want you to imagine that they are talking about you. Because, think about this for a second. If they are drama, that drama is going to go with them everywhere they go. And so if all the relationships they're having with their bosses in every job is essentially them, bringing the same dynamic over and over to these different bosses, they're going to create the same kind of relationship over and over again. And so if every time they go to a job and they're interacting with a boss, and the boss is unreasonable and crazy, and this boss was doing all these unethical things, and if you're seeing that repeatedly, it's probably not the boss. It's probably this prospective client or prospective interview person, employee. So, and I ignored this. So remember I mentioned we had that person that shut down our firm for 3 days. This person, it's interesting. This was one of the red flags I'd missed before. When I recalled what was happening during our hiring process, this person had told me that the previous boss was lazy and did all these terrible things, and had just a lot of very negative stuff about the previous boss. I didn't pay any attention to that. And interestingly, roll forward a little bit, when the firm basically got shut down by this person, the person made a direct comparison of me to the previous boss and said, you're just like him because you're doing blah, 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 blah. And I didn't think I was doing anything unreasonable, but it just goes as an example to this idea that if you are talking about the previous employers, the previous bosses, and you imagine that they're talking about you when they're saying this stuff, it's going to give you a huge insight into what kind of personality dynamic they're going to bring to your workplace. So really probe into that. Another thing that you want to probe for in a very similar vein is their relationships with coworkers. So when you're talking to them and you ask about their previous jobs, you also want to say things like, hey, at your last job, how was your workload? Or excuse me, not workload. Tell me about your coworkers there. How did you like working with those people? Who did you work with there? Like, what was the team like? If you start probing around these questions and they start giving you things like, well, I did all the work and nobody else would do anything, and this was a big problem, that could be a red flag, especially if they're repeating that in several different jobs. If you do that same thing I was talking about before, go through and cycle through the different jobs that they have on their resume and say, tell me about the work environment, tell me about your team you were working with. And if you're the same thing here, if you're getting those responses like, I did all the work, nobody did anything, nobody cared about the rules, nobody cared about the clients, if that's the kind of response you're getting, that's a red flag. So watch for that. Imagine they're talking about your team, your existing team, and the people, or your future team, whatever it is, when they're describing how they're talking about their previous coworkers. Now, what you want is somebody that's like, yeah, everything was great there. I needed a little more in my career. I was kind of at the top level of this. I didn't have anywhere else to go. Something like that. I wanted more pay. I'm looking for a new job because I got my certificate or degree or whatever, and now I just want to level up and do what I went to school for. But my last team was great. They were awesome. My last boss was great. My last boss was awesome. I like the work environment. This is not to say that they can't say anything negative, but you're really looking for the relationship dynamics. That's what you want to filter for, both with the bosses and the coworkers. You also want to ask some questions that are going to be geared towards victim mindset. And this is where I looked ahead on my outline. This is where the workload comes in. So ask things like, how was your workload? And if they're giving things like, I was doing everything, or if they say anything that sounds very victim-y, that could be a potential red flag. If it's, I did all the work, I was just perpetually overloaded, I didn't like it. If their focus becomes on victimhood stuff, that's a problem, right? I was constantly overworked and I hated it there. Very victim-y, right? Contrast that with, well, it was constant. We had a lot of work. So business was always booming. It kept me busy. Like, that doesn't sound victim-y in the way it's described. So they can say essentially the same things in different ways, and just watch for how aligned it is with victimhood. It was always busy and that made the day go by fast. Like, that doesn't sound victim-y, right? I was perpetually overloaded and they always gave me too much work. That sounds victim-y. So just filter for that a little bit. Remember, you're probing through all this stuff. You're feeling out the orientation that they have for anything, because that same dynamic is going to be coming to you. You also want to listen for other drama orientations. A response to a workload question could say something like, well, this really would have been fine except that no one else ever did their jobs. That's a persecutor orientation, because remember, persecutors are very often hung up on the rules. They're hung up on everybody has to do the appropriate thing. Everybody has to go out and do their jobs or follow the social contract or whatever it is. You can also have emphasis on how people coming in as a rescuer. For example, if you hear something like, well, my workload was fine, but I always had to come on and take on Sally's workload because everyone kept dumping stuff on her, and she was very slow at everything. That sounds like somebody trying to jump in and save the day. So always be on guard for any of these drama orientations. In anything that's being said, think about the relationship dynamics more than anything else on this. Another thing that you want to be aware of is that sometimes people know to lie. So for example, say that they've listened to this podcast, and so they kind of go, okay, I'm never going to say anything negative about my previous boss, even though I hated him. And I've had this too, where they're misrepresenting. They'll say, oh yeah, my previous job was great. So now you go, well, how do I know if they're drama or not without getting straight answers from them? And one of the mechanisms you can use to kind of get around that is to follow up. So you can say something like, hey, when we follow up with your previous employer or your current employer, and we ask your boss about you, what do you think they're going to say? I've had several times in interviews where that question prompted a whole shift in the dialogue. If just, I didn't even have to necessarily follow up with the previous boss. Just asking the question sometimes will make people straight. And so if they know to kind of coach their questions a little bit and give you the right answers, even though that's not really what they're thinking, when you start threatening enforcement of checking up on their information, essentially, a lot of times that will reveal, the stuff that they actually are going to be said. That scenario I was talking about before with the paralegal that came in for a hire, that one really blew up when I turned it into, okay, so what's your boss going to tell me about the situation when you left, when we reach out and kind of verify your employment and talk to them and everything. And then that turned into, well, here's what my boss will probably say because here's what happened. So just imposing that question, and I'm not saying don't follow up, and if you do, get an authorization from them, or again, follow whatever your legal rules are for your jurisdiction. But just, I'm not saying don't follow up. I mean, you certainly can, but just oftentimes simply saying what's going to happen when I follow up is in and of itself going to prompt people to be a little more honest about what's going on. Another thing that you can kind of look at is personality tests. I'm not personally a big fan of those. I know a lot of people are big into doing like the MBTI, the Myers-Briggs. There's a number of different personality assessments you can do. I'm not huge on that unless you're just trying to look for somebody that's going to click in a personality construct way. My favorite, I've done a podcast on this previously, is the Big Five personality aspect scale. I feel like this is a lot of extra work for not a lot of benefit. And if you look at it from the Big Five paradigm, it's often that every conceivable personality construct has some benefits in different situations. Now, there is one aspect of like the Big Five that I would think is useful insofar as you look at neuroticism, because neuroticism is one of the axes of the Big Five, one of the Big Five of that personality construct. And if you're looking at neuroticism, I think that can kind of feed into drama a little bit. But otherwise, I don't tend to think that personality assessments really speak to drama or not, because you can have people that are high drama or low drama in the same basic personality construct. Because I think it's more how they are, how they're choosing to deal with the situation as opposed to what their default thought processes are going to be within that. Another thing to kind of think about or keep in mind is that not everybody's going to be perfect. In an ideal world, we're going to have somebody that's just zero drama. And you're going to have somebody that gives you all the perfect answers, and then you follow up and their bosses are like, this is the most amazing employee ever. I'm so sad about losing them. And their coworkers love them, and they say, oh, my coworkers were the best. And so you're getting all the right answers. You're not getting any indications of victimhood or persecutor conduct or rescuer or anything. But amidst all of this, it's really hard to get somebody that is like that completely. Most people are somewhere on the drama continuum. And I did a previous podcast episode where I talked about the drama continuum. And my basic theme of that is that if you think of the drama as being a continuum, which is how I perceive it, on one end of the spectrum, you've got somebody that is never drama at all and just is absolutely perfect and doesn't feed into any games or anything. On the opposite end of the spectrum, you've got somebody who's like hyper drama and just everything is dramatic and victimy and persecutor and angry and I've got to save the day. And it's just crazy. Most of us fall somewhere in between those two extremes, right? And so you're not going to have somebody that's totally perfect. So in scenarios where you feel like, oh, there's a little bit of drama here, I don't personally let that totally steer me away from them. However, with that said, the scenarios where I've started thinking, man, there's a lot of red flags here, and I didn't heed that, I regretted it. When we were in the midst of 2020, I remember we did some hiring during that period, and for some reason, the prospective employees during that era were just much lower quality than in other times that we'd seen. And I remember we ended up kind of landing on somebody who seemed like they were less drama than everybody else. And so we sort of, in a sense, settled because we recognized there were some of the drama flags there, but we just were like, well, this person's less drama than all the others. And it ended up being a disaster. We had to let that person go. And so if you feel like they're there, I would say don't hire. It's much easier to not hire someone in the first place than to fire them after you've invested money in training them. And just firing people can be a nightmare. Sometimes you're dealing with things like unemployment insurance and all sorts of other issues that just make it a nightmare on the back end. So it's much better always to not hire someone in the first place than to have to fire them and deal with all the aftermath of that. So if you feel like there's enough red flags there, don't hire, even if there's no other good candidates at that point. However, you, for the most part, you're thinking of this on a spectrum. You want to make sure that you are getting somebody that's as low a drama as possible, but don't necessarily assume that they're all going to be completely perfect. Most people have some amount of drama in them, self included. I've got some proclivity for drama. Take the test if you want to just get a sense of this. I've created a little test that I made. I don't know how scientifically accurate it is, but something that I created based on the drama triangle. I'll put a link to this wherever the podcast is, but I have a test on my website that will give you a sense of where you are on the continuum, or at least kind of make you think about some of those things. Another thing to think about is that sometimes these people are going to get through anyway. So it is very possible that you do all the filters, you've done all the right things, they sound like they're low drama, and they get in and they start working with you, and they are drama. Or maybe you didn't heed those red flags, like I said before, and they ended up working with you. Don't be afraid to fire them. Honestly, the sooner you fire someone that's drama, the better. The less entrenched they become in the system. If you do have to fire someone, I know it's tough. I hate firing people. I really hate firing people. It feels like a very unpleasant experience, but it's much better to do it sooner than later if you start to recognize that this person is too much drama to continue working with. So make sure you do it legally. Build up a case if that's necessary to do. This is another reason it's easier to not hire someone than to hire someone and have to deal with it later. You want to make sure that you're building up a legal case in case there's some problem afterwards, like unemployment insurance, or they try to do a wrongful discharge lawsuit or something crazy like that. So make sure that you are grounded in your reasons for firing them, and make sure that you have a document trail that's going to comport with the legal requirements in your jurisdiction. Check with an employment law attorney if you need some more on that. I am not a fan of, let's talk just briefly about the firing process and drama in there. Again, make sure you're following the legal requirements. So to whatever extent this conflicts with anything legal, go with the legal before the drama stuff. But personally, if you have to fire somebody, I prefer doing it in person or at a bare minimum on video, so that you can kind of see them face to face. I just, as an ethical level, I prefer to do it that way. I don't like sending people emails unless they're just not showing up or something. If they're just disappearing and you don't know where the heck they are, do what you have to do. But generally speaking, I prefer to tell someone face to face. I really like to, for purposes of drama, I like to minimize the discussion. I do not like to go into elaborate discussions about why I am firing this person. If that has to come up at all, because I've had that happen before, I'll tend to just devolve into, it's just not a good fit right now. And the reason for that is that a lot of times, and I have a chapter on this in my Emotional Embuffination book, which I'll do my little shameless plug there. Please check that out if you haven't. And I think I've done a podcast on this before, and I mentioned this in various resources all over the place. There's this idea of arguing with facts, which is generally not helpful. If I get into an argument with somebody that's emotionally embedded in a position, by me arguing factual positions with them, I'm not going to change their position, at least not during that argument. And so if I start to try to explain to them why I'm firing them, a lot of times that's just a prompt for an argument. So if I say, well, you were never on time, you might start getting all sorts of excuses. Or I didn't like your work product. Well, my work product was exactly what you needed and asked for, and blah, blah, blah. So you're effectively, if you get too far into the realm of here's why I'm firing you, then it just prompts that argument with facts. So try to avoid that if at all possible. Really minimize the discussion on that. I'm assuming that if you're having to fire someone, you've kind of created your paper trail already. and you've already come back to this person and said like, hey, here's the problem, I need you to fix this. And there's a document trail of that. Like if I've already, prior to the actual firing, I've said, hey, you're having this issue and I need you to fix it, please fix it, or, we're going to have to escalate this to terminating you. If you've got that document trail in place, you don't really have to have much of a discussion with the person during the firing process, because they should effectively already know. And on top of that, you've got kind of your legal support in case there's something that comes back at you later on. Also, if somebody is high drama already, then they already like to argue. And they already like to tell you, because that's where we go into victimhood and persecutor mode. Because now in their minds, you're doing the wrong thing. So try not to get too far into this discussion. Also, you want to make sure that you're taking basic safety measures, especially if you think this person could be violent. Make sure that you have done things like thought about how you're going to do this and how they're going to react. If this is a person that's very volatile and you think they might be physically violent, if they're that dramatic, then do something to think through safety plans. If they start going nuts on you, what are you going to do? Do you have time to get out of there? Is there a way for you to do a 911 call really quickly? Do you have a backdoor out? Are there other people that can see you in your office? Do you have an escape route? Are there staff members that know what's going on and are willing and capable to jump in and do something to help you? Also, just especially in the drama realm, but also for kind of legal purposes, I really like to have at least one other person with me when I'm doing firing, just so that you have a witness. I don't like doing firings alone. Even if I'm doing like the actual firing, I prefer to have another person there, because I have seen scenarios where the person being fired comes back and says, well, he said all these crazy things. And if it's just my word against this person's, then, who's there to back you up, and you may or may not be believed. If you've got another person saying, I was sitting in there and here's what happened, you've got a witness. That also gives the added benefit of, if things do kind of escalate, it gives you some backup, in essence, that they can help you kind of watch what's going on. I'm not a big fan of recording, and be very careful with that. There's some jurisdictions where that can be a problem. So be very cautious, especially if you're doing things like by video or phone or something. Be extremely cautious about recording. Make sure you check the laws in your locality about whether or not you can even do that. But that's kind of it in a nutshell. I'll probably kind of leave it right there. Basic highlights of this are: understand the drama triangle. Understand what it is that you're looking for. Understand that the drama can impact the workplace significantly. Start to look for that on the front end. Look for the red flags. Look for the dynamics. Explore the dynamics between this prospective employee, their previous employers, their bosses, their coworkers. Hunt and flush out anything that sounds like it could be a drama orientation. And then also, don't be afraid to fire people if you need to. If you do so, do that with kind of minimal drama. Make sure that you've got witnesses there. Make sure you're doing everything legal. Again, I'm not a big fan of the personality test, but that's pretty much it. I mean, the biggest thing in my mind is just understanding what the drama triangle is and being on the watch for those indicators. And then just don't hire somebody that's high in those indicators. If you start recognizing them, if you start to recognize them in the midst of an interview, make notes of it and cut it off. That you don't want to hire that person. So I'll leave it there. I hope that this has been useful. If you are an employee, I hope that this also gives you some insight. And if you do find yourself like checking all those boxes, you're like, every job that I go to, I'm having conflict with my bosses and my coworkers, and it's been like that for the last 5 jobs, maybe start working on you. And I know that's a very hard pill to swallow for most people. And quite honestly, everybody should be working on themselves all the time. No matter what level you're at, there's always room for improvement. So try to improve yourself. That also works for the employers too, because you're going to be bringing the same dynamic to your workplace or your team or whatever that you have just in yourself. So That's what Emotional Embuffination is for. That's why we've got all these other resources. Please listen to more of the podcast. Don't forget to like, subscribe, give me an awesome review wherever it is that you're hearing this, on whatever podcast directory you hear, or YouTube, or please go to the site, check out the other materials I have. Don't forget to sign up for the newsletter. You can check out the site at embuff.com. That's embuff.com. But that's going to bring us to the end of today's show. I hope that you found this useful. I hope that you can take something out of this. Remember, keep becoming more emotionally embuffed. At the end of the day, my goal is to have you working on this continually. I want you to not just go to, it's just like when we go to the gym. I don't want you to just go one time and say, well, I'm buff forever. I don't ever have to go again. I listened to that one podcast episode, I'm emotionally embuffed forever. It doesn't work like that. You keep working on it all the time. You go to the gym on a regular basis in the same sense that you continue to work on being emotionally embuffed all the time. So please continue working on that. Hopefully, before long, if you are not already saying this, instead of saying things like, the struggle is real, you will go to saying things like, what struggle? Thank you all for listening. I hope you've enjoyed this. Have a great week, and I will see you on the next show.